Thanks, Jamil. As Jamil mentioned, this presentation is on winning the war, how to build a great social game company, and why it is so important these days to really be focused on creating a great company, the difficulties involved. So start with a tiny bit of background about myself so that I can put it into context and see how my experiences and what I'm talking about relate to you. Then actually, again, why it is difficult to succeed and what is success, then how to go about building it, something that I've arrogantly mentioned, named the Melnick conundrum in terms of one of the big issues that you will face when you're building your company, and then a couple minutes for Q&A. Since the session lengths have been shortened to 25 minutes, if we don't get to all of your questions in the session, I'm at a stand right across the hall, and I'll be there most of tomorrow, and I'll also put up my email address if anyone wants to reach out to me. So again, a little bit about myself and my experience in terms of building, companies, and I have, experience kind of on all sides of the table. So I started with a very small game company that we self-financed, as Jamil mentioned, back in '93. Grew that into a very profitable casual game company that then pivoted into the social space. We were fortunately acquired by Playdom in April of 2010, which then became part of Disney, where I was leading the efforts in Europe and Latin America. And then last August, I was recruited to run 519. So I've been at the smallest you can get, a two-person company. Well, I guess the smallest you can get is a one-person company. But I started at a two-person company, then part of the largest entertainment company in the world, and now with another game company, which is somewhat in the middle. I'll talk a little bit about it in a second. But it's actually a joint venture of two of the larger entertainment companies in the U.S., the EW Scripps Company, a publicly traded $700 million media company based in Ohio, and Capitol Broadcasting, the largest entertainment company in the Southeast. We've put together a really interesting team, and again, that kind of gives me a perspective that hopefully I can convey in this presentation. But as you see, we've brought in executives and players really from some of the top companies. So it's allowed me to incorporate their experiences, hopefully in the presentation that we'll be discussing today. And one last thing about 519. So we are a social game company, and what we mean by that is we both create games ourselves based on our IP, and you might have seen the news, we actually launched a third-party publishing program today. But on to the focus of this presentation. And first, the presentation was titled Winning the War, and I did that on purpose because it is extremely difficult to build a social game company these days. And this slide is probably the biggest reason why. Only about 25%, and this actually might be on the optimistic side, of games that hit the market actually break even or make a profit. That is a huge hurdle for any company, especially a small company. Everyone thinks their game is in that 25%, but you are fighting the odds. And those odds are tremendous. And it's across the board. This is not only with small developers. I don't know how many of you have saw Zynga's announcement today. They missed their earnings number and the stock dropped over 30%. And again, they're dealing with this. Almost every game company that I've come across really has to deal with this conundrum, well, not conundrum, but fact, and that's the most difficult thing you're going to be dealing with when you're building your company. 3 out of 4 products that you create are going to fail. If you only have one game, that means you have a 75% chance of not even getting out of the gate. So that's the depressing part. So hopefully we're going to address then how do you succeed. And I think the first thing that's important is to talk about what is success. I've created a hierarchical pyramid. So the first thing is survival. As I mentioned at the beginning, started my first company back in 1993, and we actually were able to survive for 17 years, and that allowed us to eventually do some very interesting things in the social space and lead on. So the first thing you have to do is survive. You're not going to be able to achieve the next levels of success if you're not in business. The second one is being profitable. Obviously, very close to surviving, though you do see a lot of companies survive for a few years without being profitable. But the next step in terms of growing your company is obviously generating positive cash flow so that you can then invest in more projects, in more people, in better people. And then finally, what almost everyone wants is an exit. Usually in the game space, it's an acquisition. So that's really kind of the hierarchy of where you want to go. If you're not profitable, or if you haven't survived, you're not going to get to that exit. So that's really, when I talk about succeeding, that's what I'm talking about. When you're dealing with your investors, it's going to be a little bit different. They really don't care that much about your short-term survival. They're looking for that exit because they want to make money on their investment, and then they're looking to get a certain amount of return on that investment. So what they're looking for, and this is important for you because if you're going out and raising money and you're positioning yourself, you have to be thinking how the investor's thinking. It doesn't matter what you want. You have to be thinking of convincing them that this is going to be a success in their eyes. So what they're looking for is a scalable business, something you can grow quickly. It's a unique business. A lot of times you come across a game company saying, we're going to create Facebook games, we're going to create mobile games. Well, there's 7,000 companies or 10,000 companies also doing it. Why should they invest in you that's going to help them get to that exit? And related to that, how are you different than everyone else? And then the valuation. What's very interesting is a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of early stage companies try to get the best possible valuation from their investors. On the face of it, that seems like a no-brainer. Of course you want to keep the most share of your company. But if you get a very high valuation, it makes it very hard to get to that exit sometimes. Because, again, the investor is going to want a certain return. So let's say they value the company at $10 million. A year or two later, you have an offer to sell your company for $12 million or $8 million. That could be great for you personally. That could be all, half that money might go into your pocket. The investor will probably say no, because that return for them is not that interesting. Now, if they had made the investment at, say, a $4 million valuation, they'd be tripling their money, so they'd be much more willing to do it. So when you look out there and you're raising money, you need to look at not only getting the best deal for yourself, but getting a deal that's going to make it possible for you to achieve your goals. And then if the investors pass, just some other ways to get to that, at least get to that initial survival level. Our first round of capital at Merscom was from Visa and MasterCard. That's how a lot of companies get started. And actually, they're a lot easier as board members than institutional investors. You can also go to your friends and family. Again, this is a very hit-driven industry. So no matter what you're doing, you have to realize that you might be raising money from friends, from family, and there's a chance, even though you're confident your game's going to succeed, that it fails. You have to be ready, and they have to understand that they might lose that money, and you don't want that to ruin Thanksgiving or ruin your next reunion. So those are just how I look at success and how your investors are going to look at it and how you can kind of get to that first stage. Then how do you succeed? And part of it is creating a great game, but in the mobile social space, it's really by focusing on LTV from the start, and that's the lifetime value of your user. So if you build a great game that really takes all of these elements into account, that's how you're going to be successful. So you can create a fantastic product that people love. If it doesn't monetize, it's worthless. There's not necessarily worthless. You might be able to use it to drive traffic to other products, but generally you have to have a monetization strategy behind it. Almost more important is retention. A lot of games now, they do great the first day. You can drive traffic to it. People enjoy the game, but they never come back. If people don't come back to your game, your long-term revenue from that game is going to be insignificant. Engagement. Are people playing for 5 seconds? Are they playing for 30 seconds? And then virality. And this isn't only using the viral hooks that you have on Facebook or that you use through Game Center or whatever platform you're building it on, but word of mouth. Creating a product that people are going to talk about so that you're not buying every user. So these are 4 things that you really need to be thinking about from day one when you're creating that game if you want to build a successful, profitable game company. With monetization, there's 3 big parts of it. I think I'm not going to repeat what you've probably heard in 50 lectures this week, but the free-to-play model is by far the main source of growing your company. The paid app model, unless you're a licensed property or have some a very unique business situation, is not going to be enough to justify it. You're not going to get enough through advertising. Free-to-play is, as you've heard again repeatedly, is the future for casual social games. It needs to be, but this monetization needs to be built in from day one. I've seen a lot of companies, especially design-led companies, maybe ones that come from the core, the traditional gaming space, where they create a brilliant game design, a brilliant plan for the future, but they don't put in monetization. They think, okay, this is something we'll do at the end of the project. You can't do it that way. It's not going to work. Your game won't succeed. You'll be part of that 75% that fail. And then you also have to support your high-value customers. Some of our competitors call them whales. I don't think that's a nice way of treating the people who are actually spending the most money in your game. But those people have to be able to spend $100, $150 to support all the people not playing the game. These are all things you have to think about from the first day of creating your product. On the retention side, as Jamil mentioned, it has to be fun. No one's, especially these days, you're competing with so many other products. And you're not only competing with games, you're competing with television, you're competing with films, you're competing with virtual worlds. You have to create something that's going to be more fun than their other media alternatives. And what we like to do when we're thinking of how a game is going to be fun or retain people is think about if it's going to stick in the player's mind when they're not playing the game. When they're at work, when they're at work, not playing the game, or they're in the car, are they going to be thinking about, wow, my character should be doing this, or I have to get back to the game? You want to be sticking in their brain, again, when they're not playing. That's, to me, when you've created a successful product. If it's something people might be enjoying, but as soon as they stop playing it, it doesn't cross their consciousness again, they probably won't come back to the game, they probably won't spend much time in it. Now, the next one is virality. Lots of ways to do it. We can talk about that offline at another point. But whatever platform you choose, be it iOS, Windows 8, Facebook, take advantage of the platform. There's different ways that you can have your players reach out to other players. You might use a service like HeyZap. You might be tied into Game Center, Facebook Connect. There's millions of options. Make sure you use as many of those as possible. You also have to give people reasons to bring their friends into a game. It's not, just visiting so-and-so's farm really doesn't convey much value to the player or to their friend. But give them a reason to bring in their friends, some kind of reward. Make them do things collaboratively that they can't do by themselves. Let them share the experience. Create content that makes it interesting for them to talk about the game with their friends. And then the final element is, you want to create a collaborative gaming experience where people are playing, again, to build something, to do things as a group, or a player versus player experience like a pop song. There's no right or wrong answer, but both of them have different kind of viral flows to them. And then one of the biggest problems you're going to deal with is balancing diversification of your company versus focus. It's the biggest challenge, not only for small companies, but for companies of any size. And again, if your goal is first survival, then profitability, then an exit, this is something you have to deal with at each stage of that level. And obviously, what they run against each other is you need diversification, so you're not taking all your risk on one product when you only have a 25% chance of succeeding. But a small company, even a mid-sized company, you have to be focused. You have to really know what you're doing and do it well. If you're all over the board and your 10 competitors are focused on doing one thing well, the chances of you being successful get diminished by that much. It was interesting. I was meeting with some developers in South America a couple of weeks ago, and a lot of them were working on mobile games, console games, Facebook games, with a team of like 4 or 5 developers in total. The chances of them creating a great product when they have competitors who have 20, 50-person teams just focus on one Facebook game or one mobile game, you're taking that 25% chance of creating a success and probably bringing it down to 2.5% or even less. So what do you do about it? Well, first you need a balanced portfolio. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. So you do need to try to create multiple titles. And you want titles that are not going to be correlated with each other. And by that I mean, if you create, say, 3 word games with a very similar mechanic, and one's red, one's branded, and one's reverse text, they'll probably do about the same. You want some games that, well, if one of them's a success, it really doesn't affect if the other one's going to be a success. You also want to be diversified on platform. Hopefully you can keep your focus on creating the great content, but not put all your eggs in the Facebook wagon or the iOS wagon. For those of you who have been in the game industry for a long time, most game companies, including the big publishers, have failed by missing inflection points when platform changes, be it going away from Sega to PlayStation 2 or the emergence of the Xbox, and just being late to those parties. And you're seeing it now with the companies that maybe have missed iOS. It's one of the ways, again, that really reduces your chances of success. So if you can diversify along platforms, that's increasing your odds. So, and then on the focus side, so there's two things you really want to be able to focus on. Focus on the competitive landscape. You have a limited number of resources, so don't create what everyone else is creating. That goes back to the point what investors are looking for, but it's also what customers are looking for. It's important to be focused on creating something that's going to give you a unique position in the market. And as I said earlier, free to play. I almost feel that it's trivial saying it. You probably all already know that. But it's really the only business model that's going to drive growth, that's going to be able to support your company in the long term. So I want to leave a few minutes for questions. But as a summary, you have to be realistic about the odds. Everyone in this room is facing those same odds, and it's that 25% of games succeed. You want to improve them as much as possible, but you're not going to be able to change those numbers. And so you have to build your business with that in mind. How do you improve the odds? You focus, you create great products, and by great, that's products that monetize, that have virality built in. But you focus, in that focus, you also diversify your offerings. So I think we have about 6 minutes for questions. So wanted to open it up to questions. And again, if we don't have a chance to get to them, or there's something you would rather ask offline, feel free to reach out to me. Thanks. Any questions? Okay, great.
So, are these actually on? Maybe not. You'll have to repeat my question, I guess.
Sure.
Your slide about diversifying on platforms, how do you kind of overcome the fear of going with something brand new? Because most of the platforms we talk about are things that we have prior experience with and can kind of look to.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's how you can balance your risk. Oh, I'm sorry. So Jamil asked, when you're looking at diversifying your platforms, other than looking at what's established in the market, which is very effective, by definition, backward-looking, it doesn't necessarily say what's going to happen, how do you assess that versus new platforms? And by that, I would assume you mean something like Windows 8. And it does get tricky. Because if you are one of the first games on a successful new platform, I've seen it with Xbox Live, you've seen it with iOS, you literally just rake in the money. But then a lot of platforms just totally fall flat on their faces. Pretty much Microsoft's every previous effort in mobile. So how do you balance that? And the thing I really focus with our teams and with the development teams we work with is trying to create tools. So again, so you can keep your focus on the product, but you extend it to other platforms. So rather than developing your Windows 8 game in XNA, maybe use an engine, say the Unreal Engine, that will allow you to port it easily to another platform. And that's a great benefit of working with an Unreal or a Unity, is it gives you that flexibility to go over to other platforms without necessarily having to make a big bet on them. So that would be how we would approach it, is try to minimize the risk, but test the platform. And then part of it is just a personal evaluation. Look at it closely. Windows 8 definitely deserves attention, if for no other reason. One of the biggest companies in the world is behind it. It's a very important product for them. They are going to push it, so it does have a chance to succeed. If there, I don't know, some Greenland ISP is creating a new platform for mobile, maybe you look at that and you say the odds are a little bit less. And I hope I didn't insult anyone from Greenland here. But that's really how you do it. I mean, I think you try to build in a technology that's easily portable to other platforms, so you're not making a big bet on it. But you also really try to do as much evaluation on the platform. Any other questions? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Rachel?
You were talking about the free-to-play model, and you said that there are some instances where games make sense to charge for, to charge a premium. What are some examples?
There's a lot of branded games. So Where's My Perry is a great example, using the Phineas and Ferb character. They put it on. I'm sorry. Oh, I needed to repeat your question. Sorry about that. So the question was, I obviously stressed the free-to-play model, but I mentioned that there were some examples of other models that have succeeded, and to elaborate on that. And what I was going to say, on the paid download model, Rovio is obviously, generates hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue by charging for a game like Angry Birds. But where it really succeeds is when you're taking a brand that people already know and are comfortable with, you put it with a download game that might have a relatively small development cycle. Where's My Perry from Disney and Temple Run, Brave from Disney are two good examples where a strong IP has been able to generate enough downloads that it really becomes an interesting business model. If you try to bring in an unbranded game, and I would argue that Angry Birds has actually created their own brand by starting as a free-to-play business, or not starting, but having their real big run as a free-to-play business. But by having an unbranded game where it's a paid app, you're really limiting your potential market. You might be able to make a profit, but you don't have that upside. And if you're already dealing with the odds of only 25% of games succeeding, you want to have an upside because it's that hit that's going to drive your company in the future. Anything else? Well, thanks again, everybody.